Kai-Kristen Kemmel. In terms of the GPT Lab, I am the head of GPT Lab. So working under Professor Pekka Abrahamsson, who is the strategic management of GPT Lab and its founder, and I am the head of the GPT Lab Tampere. What that means is that I help with the day-to-day operational research activities. I help supervise our PhD students and overall directing the research. In terms of more who I am as a researcher, I'm a postdoctoral research fellow at Tampere University, so a postdoc. Meaning I have gotten my degree 3 years ago now, and I'm currently still a junior researcher overall. I'm a software engineer, briefly put. In more detail, my research focuses on human aspects in software engineering and improving software development processes and practices. In that regard, I have had many points of view over the years, but ultimately it still boils down to software processes. One of these, the current one, of course, is how to use AI in software engineering, and specifically generative AI. Second is how to make ethical AI. So not this philosophical discussion on what is ethical AI, but more about how to actually develop ethical AI systems. So how do we bring this philosophical discussion into practice? And third has been my dissertation topic, which was improving software development in software startups. And this is something I'm currently pursuing as well, kind of getting back into it in relation to generative AI. Yeah, so as I mentioned, since my research has been about improving software development processes and the human aspects in software engineering, this involves the organizational aspects as well. I have been recently studying through case studies how do companies adopt generative AI currently and AI overall. And in this regard, we have started to see some patterns in terms of what challenges companies face. One thing is simply that companies struggle, especially with the data privacy and legislative side of things. So a lot of these current generative AI tools that are often mentioned, everyone knows ChatGPT, for example. But ChatGPT is a cloud service. By default, the data goes to the USA, or actually we don't really know for the most of the services where the data goes. So for companies working in the EU, this is a problem because given our data legislation, we kind of have to know where the data goes. Outside the legislative side, this data privacy issue is also in relation to proprietary code, for example. So software consultancies work with customer code, and sometimes the customer simply says that we don't want our code in the AI. And in that case, there's not much you can say as a company. Similarly, some companies are protective of their own code. So in this way, the data privacy is basically the main issue. But aside from this, there's many other issues like simply organizational bureaucracy. We're talking about a really fast-moving field where new tools pop up all the time. Of course, one visible example was DeepSeek. So DeepSeek pops out of nowhere. The stock market takes a dive because of it. And this happens in a kind of timeline of a month. And then companies are starting to think that should we start using DeepSeek? And of course, there's again data privacy issues of different kinds. But we're talking about a very fast-moving market where new models emerge, new tools emerge all the time. And then you have companies wondering which enterprise license to purchase. It takes time inside the organization to handle these things. And when the market moves so fast, it's kind of hard for companies to really just keep track of what is happening. So then we have data privacy, we have the organizational bureaucracy and fast-moving market, and then we have other issues more related to tools themselves. So companies struggle with simply making the best out of these tools. Or everywhere on the news, everyone is saying that you have to adopt AI or you will be left behind, so companies will want to do it. But then they adopt these tools and they are scratching their heads that, what do we actually do with this tool? Because normally, when you adopt a tool like an ERP system, you manage your enterprise resources with it or plan them. There's a clear use case. You adopt a tool to do a specific thing. But with AI, you are adopting the technology. You are putting a promise of it somehow improving everything. But in practice, companies are struggling to make the best of it. This includes understanding the benefits. So you give this tool to a software developer, but then what is the impact? How much does it really improve the software developer's work? Does the person work faster? Do they work better? It's hard to measure. And then the last and not the least are simply these perceived issues with the tools themselves. So they get adopted, but then the companies feel that they just don't perform. And this is a problem because it's difficult to pinpoint what is the problem. So is the problem that the AI model in the tool is not working as they want? Or is the problem that they are simply not using it well? And even experienced users of these tools sometimes struggle to understand that what is the best way to prompt these, because it's really hard to gauge how well you're using them. So that is the not so short answer. I think that this is a difficult question because it is exactly what everyone right now is doing. So first off, I think this whole idea of an AI transformation is still in its initial steps. So we had this whole idea of digital transformation, which we still do. We still talk about digital transformation. And I think that now we are entering the point where we start talking about AI transformation. And I would say that we will be talking about it for quite a while to come. And in that regard, I think it's very early to be kind of outlining best practices or even good practices. But I think this is a very important question, and it is actually something that I am currently researching. So I will be able to provide some insights into that through research later. But for the time being, I would say that this is a challenge everyone should be trying to tackle. Yeah, I think this ties to a lot of the problems companies are having right now with adopting generative AI. So as for the readiness, in software engineering, we often talk about maturity models for something that evaluate how ready the company is for something. And these can kind of give an idea of where you are as an organization, but there are many other ways to gauge this as well. But the question of whether hiring external help is a part of this or not, I think it's an ongoing challenge with the kind of AI transformation or AI adoption overall, that it's up to each company to kind of figure out what is the path they want to take. Do they want to start building more in-house AI capabilities or machine learning capabilities? So do they want to kind of move into this direction where they are increasingly leveraging local models? So this ties to this whole idea that we have data privacy issues when we use cloud services. If we use local models that are running on our own servers and the data never leaves the building, then the privacy issues are not there because we own the data. And so one solution to this is that you get in-house capabilities and you start increasingly focusing on this. If you don't want to go down the route of getting the in-house capabilities, then you have to get the external help. And so whether this is consultancies or research collaboration or something like this, up to the company. However, this is something that each company kind of has to start deciding. So arguably right now, the question is not really whether they adopt AI, but how to adopt it. So the companies have to kind of weigh the options there, that these cloud services often are seen not only to be very easy to adopt. You just make an account on ChatGPT or Google Gemini and start using it. It takes very little effort. But there's the potential downside of the data privacy. And similarly, often these tools are seen as being higher performance according to all kinds of benchmarks. So not only are they easy to use, but they are potentially performing better. However, if it is not really possible to leverage these because of the data privacy issues or otherwise, then you have to look at the local models. And if you start looking at the local models, then you also have to start figuring out where the required capabilities for that come from. So to answer the question in relation to kind of these the AI readiness, I think it also depends on your overall AI strategy. So what capabilities you need depends on which direction you want to go in relation to AI adoption. And I guess in this case, specifically the generative AI adoption. Of course, there's other types of AI as well. And considering whether generative AI is really the thing for what you need should be a part of the AI strategy. Yeah, I think overall, one of the most interesting, or if you want to call it revolutionary things about generative AI is that it really lowers the barrier of entry into AI. So I have been studying AI ethics alongside other research. And there, one big change now I perceive is that in the past, the focus was really on kind of developing ethical AI because AI was something companies developed for other companies to use. as a consumer or private person, you were at best kind of a passive user of like recommendation systems. Maybe you knew the AI was there, but you weren't really directly using the AI. The AI was just helping you. And similarly, maybe your job application was getting filtered by AI, but in this regard, you were kind of a passive user at best, or an object for the AI at worst. But with generative AI, now everyone can be a user of AI because they are easy to use, they are easy to adopt. They're cloud services. They require basically no technical know-how. So you can actually use them as a private person. But more importantly, they are also very versatile tools. So often AI tools are these more narrow expert systems that are really good at doing one thing or a few things. They are, if you talk about images, for example, the image recognition system is meant to figure out if there's a duck in the image. And it's really good at spotting a duck in the image, or similarly, in the case of a medical image, spotting whether there's a certain type of cancer there may be. But then that's it. It's meant for that. But with generative AI, especially large language models, you have these very versatile tools that understand natural language, and they can produce text ranging from poems to program code. So the use cases are all over the place. You can potentially use it for many kinds of things. So that, coupled with how easy they are to adopt, has kind of really revolutionized the AI landscape. And we see this as in terms of how interested companies are in AI now. Of course, AI has been a very trendy topic among companies for over a decade now, especially. But I think we are seeing a surge of interest from companies who were maybe previously not so interested in AI, because if they had no in-house capabilities, they had to hire outside help. But now any company can start using these cloud services, and it requires no know-how. You don't have to pay a consultancy to implement it. You just start using it. And at a glance, they all look really promising. So now we have global hype, and the question remains how to best make use of the tools. The ethical consideration. So what I was discussing in relation to basically before generative AI mostly being something that companies develop for other companies to use. And the end user was usually someone in the company. But now we have these systems everyone can use. And the focus kind of has been shifting also in the AI ethics discussion from how to develop ethical AI to how to use AI ethically. However, the long short answer is that it's a very difficult question, because at its core, ethics is context specific. So as an example to illustrate what that means is that in every single context, user development context, you have to consider what ethics means in that specific context. And as an example, if we have an in-house system that decides that makes a decision inside the company, it's a low-stakes decision that affects 50 people working in the SME. The impact is quite limited within that one organization, compared to, for example, ChatGPT, which has hundreds and hundreds of millions of users. So we have a very limited localized impact compared to a global impact. Or similarly, even the same technology, the ethical considerations can be different. So take, for example, kind of facial recognition using AI. So if this is used on the streets for social credit scoring, most people will say that, no, I don't want this. This is bad. But then if we think of a situation where the same facial recognition system is used at an airport to catch internationally wanted criminals, then most people maybe won't be so against the idea of using the exact same technology for a very different use case. So in this way, what I would say about what to consider when using generative AI is, of course, how you will use it. Ultimately, the most practical way of approaching AI ethics is this kind of risk-based approach that is easy to kind of comprehend for someone not so maybe well-versed in the idea of AI ethics. You simply consider who the system affects and how, and then you try to minimize the negative impacts, especially if you consider that they could be really bad for someone. That's a good question. In the startup context, I think one challenge we have perceived in the past in AI ethics research overall is that ethics remains often this kind of secondary priority. So in past cases, even in cases where an organization was interested in actively pursuing ethics, what happened is that if the project kind of was running over time or the budget was running out, the first thing to go was ethics. So even when it is being pursued, it is not often a very high priority. It's not always a trade-off, because the idea of ethics is really not to make things difficult. The idea of ethics is to consider basically the impacts and try to minimize the negative impacts. Of course, there are many ways to approach, what makes something ethical. There are hundreds, thousands of guidelines. There's some guidelines made by researchers, guidelines made by our companies that are supposed to kind of outline what is ethical AI. Now, you are free to decide yourself based on value choices what is ethical to you and how you pursue it. But ultimately, the challenge is that when you are a startup with limited resources, the harder something it is to do, the less likely you are to do it. So I think as researchers, the challenge there is that we offer easy, tangible ways to start this discussion on ethics and to guide it so that companies would be more interested in pursuing it. Of course, research collaboration is the direct way for research and companies to engage. And usually this happens this can happen in the context of projects where there is tangible industry-academia collaboration, or then it can happen as a part of individual research, where, for example, we conduct case studies or we deploy a tool and organizations are part of that study. And I think that one thing there for us researchers to do is to motivate the practical relevance of our research. So it is also for companies to kind of see the value in our research, to kind of see what research could help them with, and to understand how what we do differs from what companies do. So, for example, what we do is not for profit, we do it for science, and our approaches to doing the same things can differ. So companies develop software as a part of research. We may also develop software. It can be done through action research or design science. So we are doing the same thing, but we are following a scientific approach to it. So understanding how science works in this regard is not just for companies to, it's not their responsibility only, but it's also our responsibility as researchers to clearly communicate this. And of course, just as it is up to companies to kind of see the value in the research, to give it a chance, it is also up to researchers to communicate clearly to companies what the value of the research could be. And of course, this also involves actively thinking about this as a part of your research. So trying to see your research from both points of view. Of course, this has been, for example, in information system science, this whole idea of theoretical contribution versus practical relevance has been an ongoing debate for decades. And I think that overall in science, this is an important debate to have. So when you do research, you should think about it from both points of view, that A, what is the theoretical contribution of my research? So what does it give to science? But also B, what is the practical relevance? So what real world application does this have? And how could companies benefit from this? Because ultimately, you will want the companies to gain something from the collaboration. Because ultimately businesses exist to please stakeholders, shareholders. I don't know. Well, I guess I can talk about my own research in this regard mainly. So what I have done in the past has been kind of case studies where I want to understand, for example, so this is an example of qualitative research. So with case studies, one thing that you can offer to companies is that the results you get would also be of interest to them. You go into the company, as a part of the research, you want to understand what is the current state they are at in regards to some phenomenon. So I have studied this in regard to hybrid work in the past, and recently in relation to generative AI adoption. So what you get as a result is kind of a picture of how the company is doing right now. And depending on the company, depending on where they are at themselves, this can actually be interesting information for them as well, to better understand how are they functioning as an organization in relation to the phenomenon. What do their employees feel about their hybrid work practices, or how do the employees perceive the AI tools they're currently using? As another example of something I have done in the past is using action research to develop something. So we started developing, for example, a tool for AI ethics, a method to help companies implement it. Initially, we did some student testing where in student projects, the student teams used it. Based on this, we made some improvements to the tool. And when we felt that it was kind of understandable to people and somewhat helpful, then we started engaging companies because we felt that we had something to offer to them. So what we did is that we give them the tool, they use it in a project, and then we basically ask them how it's going, or we observe their meetings. So there's now two things that I have given as examples. One is that if you are kind of doing research in the organization, in a case study, for example, the information you collect might be interesting to the company as well, because ultimately you're studying the company as a case. And then second is kind of this tool or artifact development. It can be software, it can be a method like we did, it can be something else. So you develop this kind of artifact as a part of research, and then when you have it developed as a part of the research, you evaluate it through empirical data from companies. So in this case, you actually give the companies a potentially useful tool or some other artifact that they can use. So I think these are two examples of ways in which research can help companies. Yeah, I think that this is actually, again, a very good problem, not a good problem, but more like a good question and a problem that you need to think about when you're working on a very kind of trendy field, because the field moves very fast. And the idea, of course, in research is that we study phenomena, we study things that where the results remain relevant. And if the field is very fast moving, this presents some challenges. And I think that one thing here is that you need to think about the kind of research you are doing. It, of course, depends on what your focus is, what kind of researcher you are. In my case, as an example, since I am focusing on the people and process angle, it doesn't really matter to me if you are using ChatGPT 3. I mean, now it doesn't exist, but if you were using ChatGPT 3.5, I could still ask, how is it going? What problems do you see? And now if the company is using ChatGPT 4.0, using Google Gemini 2, I can still ask them the same questions, because if I'm studying AI adoption, if I'm studying the challenges of using it in real world industrial context, the individual tools are not really always the focus. It's more about the people and the practices and the organizations. So this is how in my work, I try to zoom out and look past the current technologies we have, exactly because things move fast. And next year we will have new AI models, and not just models, but we may have new approaches related to training new models that might prove to be breakthroughs. And so even if you are working on kind of tools using current models, for example, you may consider the value of modularity in which models you are using and trying to kind of provide value past evaluating the performance of any one specific model you are using. Yeah, I think this boils down to one of the earlier questions you had, that the big question right now is, for me, is this AI transformation. So the real kind of specific points of view to this are this kind of AI strategy. So when you have this average company that's not a big forerunner, like some industry giant like Google, that you have to kind of have the average software company that's now scratching their heads on what to do with generative AI. How does that kind of company start kind of shaping an AI strategy for themselves? And what kind of consideration does it include? And then past this kind of strategic high-level things, also the AI adoption process. So what kind of more specific consideration do you have to take into account? So I mentioned this kind of local versus cloud model trade-off or consideration. Considering these kinds of aspects is a part of the AI adoption and AI strategy. And these are kind of intertwined. And I think that this overall AI transformation, AI strategy, will be key in the coming years. Because the thing is that right now, generative AI has reached the point where the performance is interesting for companies. And it depends. No one can say for sure how the performance will evolve in the next 5 years. But I think what we do know is that the performance already is interesting. So companies will now be looking into this adoption, and the AI strategy and the AI adoption remain interesting points of views, whether or not we see very high growth in AI performance, because already it is interesting. Does early career refer to PhD students who are starting out?
Yeah.
I think that maybe I wouldn't look so much at the specific kind of applied AI there. I think that the important thing is that you kind of get into the role of a PhD student overall. This involves really understanding what is your topic. Of course, you have an idea of what is your topic if you started your PhD, but often the exact research questions, the exact approaches of what you do, they evolve during the process. And this might be because you do some studies and you realize that, okay, maybe I should focus on this specific thing that came up in the study. Or maybe some breakthrough happens that in terms of technology that shifts you to another direction. Or then maybe you get some results that that direct you into some other direction. Or maybe you read some literature that makes you think that you should address some other gap. But overall, just trying to crystallize your topic and then be in the mindset of constantly evaluating if what you're doing is what you should be doing. And as a second thing, I think that the key thing is to be really aware of what is being published about your topic. This is not always easy because science is not clear-cut in terms of what field you are in. There is research being done on the same phenomena in many different fields. Especially, for example, in generative AI right now, everyone's talking about generative AI. Historians are talking about what to do with generative AI. AI ethicists are talking about what does generative AI mean for AI ethics. Software engineers are wondering what to do with generative AI in software engineering. Business people are talking about AI strategy. AI people are looking at the technical side of things in generative AI. So if your topic, for example, is generative AI, it's important that you understand who is talking about it and how, and that you take part in the right discussion, because different disciplines talk about the same things with different concepts sometimes. So maybe you will find relevant literature that is kind of outside your core field, but you have different people talking about the same thing. It doesn't mean that you should change fields necessarily, but it might be really good if you know that the discussion is going on, because then it can motivate your research. You can cite that in your research and say that, in other disciplines, people are talking about this. And of course, similarly, it's especially important to keep track of what is going on in your own field. So this is kind of very generic advice, but I feel like the kind of PhD process is really, regardless of your topic, you have these same general challenges.